Yeah. Yeah, who wants a money like that? But money shouldn't be some money-making deal. It's time to change the money, time to make the money real. You know how injustice and corruption makes you feel like the world is against you and you got no way to deal with the awful aggravation watching greedy bankers steal. Now we can do it better, the solution's been found. Create a kind of money that can pay it all down. An asset that is always circulating around to make a better world with our feet all on the ground. Yeah, who wants a money like that?
All right.
Like that.
But it cut out a little bit on me. I'm sorry.
Oh. All right. I'm sorry. That was my experiment of trying to talk over a YouTube music track.
Thank you. Applause for Howard.
Good job. Good
Thank
job.
you. Thank you all very much.
Greetings, everybody.
You want me to?
Greetings. Hello.
Say what? Yeah.
I was going to give us my intro as the host, and then you go ahead and get started.
Oh, thank you.
Today's workshop, the role of money in oppression and liberation. We'll have an in-depth look at the many kinds of oppression that people face and examine how they're all linked to the money power. This workshop will also look at how we can overcome oppression by changing the financial system. Presenting with Howard. Go ahead and introduce yourself and go ahead and get started.
I'll start. My name is Mary Sanderson. I want to give everybody greetings and welcome. We're very happy to see 13 people following the work of the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee. I'm a Wisconsin Green and I co-chair the BMRC with Tennessee Howard Switzer. Many thanks to Felina Farley, our tech host, and to Sue Peters, who will drop some background and reference links into the chat for everyone to copy and follow up on. Howard, I saw a request for you to put "Who Wants a Money Like That" lyrics in the chat too, please.
Okay.
We have a favor to ask you. If you would kindly put your name and email and location into the chat so that we can ask you for feedback on our talk. Your feedback is ultra valuable to us. If you happen to be on the phone, please let Felina enter your information for you. When we really get into the talk, we're gonna close the chat. But if you could put in your personal information now, that would be just very helpful and appreciated. So many of you know that our Green Party BMRC is, our goal is to change the money, as Howard says, so that instead of living in service to the money power, the money system will serve people and planet. Who are we? What do we do? We meet weekly on Thursday nights to discuss events, to grow our understanding of the big privately controlled credit system, and to work on strategies and tactics for turning that concentrating parasitic system into a distributive, nurturing one. These meetings are sometimes confusing, but more often fun. And they generate the material for our monthly newsletter called Greening the Dollar. The newsletter relates historical and current events to our Green Party call for representative sovereign money creation system. And the newsletter links a wide variety of supporting materials for your browsing pleasure. Among the URLs that Sue will put in the chat is the one to subscribe to our newsletter. Each state and caucus may name up to 3 people to join our BMRC effort, and y'all are invited. Besides our weekly conversations and our monthly newsletter, our biggest accomplishment last year has been winning approval for moving monetary reform plank to its logical place in the platform and updating the language of it, which was 10 years old. Again, this year, we have submitted a proposal to further integrate the monetary reform plank into the platform as a whole. Remember, whatever your pet concern is as a Green, it doubtless requires money. You are invited to schedule a Thursday session with us about your issue. We can talk about how a representative sovereign money can totally change your prospects for success. Howard Switzer, our longtime Tennessee Green and Straw Bale architect, will lay it down for us now, how the debt for money system goes hand in hand with oppression, and what are we going to do about it?
All right. Thank you very much, Mary. Okay, well, let me try and get this thing started, and need to get up here and start from the beginning, right? All right, that's the title of our program, and get oriented here. All right, and our goals for today is to share with you the interrelatedness of money and oppression, and an understanding of how the current money system works, and the fundamentals of a fair and just money system. And but our theme is oppression, and it's always about power over another. Oppression is power over another's, and it's always about limiting potential. Our current system fosters oppression because money is power, and the money is concentrating to fewer and fewer people. There are deeply rooted and damaging oppressive systems in our society, and as we will show you today, we are all oppressed under the current monetary system. Power and privilege, the core idea is that one group is better than another, and this gives them the right to control or mistreat another group. So power and privilege usually comes from economic inequity. Oppression is experienced in 3 basic ways. Let me see here. Let's get oriented. Oh yeah. Okay. The interpersonal, the institutional, and the internalized. Now, this graphic illustrates these 3 dimensions of oppression as an iceberg. The interpersonal is the visible level of oppression. This is the realm of physical violence, poverty, people suffering the consequences of artificial scarcity, and people mistreated and discriminated against, experienced individually, as well as more overt forms of oppression, such as violence from police or war. This is how we experience oppression directly, but it is just the tip of the iceberg. Then we have the below the visible surface, we have the hidden institutional level of oppression. It is violence that is not so readily seen nor widely understood. This is the level where our privatized monetary system operates, influencing corporations and the government. It also is where foundations exist whose power to oppress is often hidden beneath a cloak of philanthropy, like funding a climate initiative while funding the militarization of police. Then we have the deepest hidden level of oppression, internalized oppression. This is the cultural, psychological level of passive acceptance of inequalities and injustice, the subconscious level of I'm not good enough, or there's no future for me. Trust the guy in charge. This is where research is showing how we carry around the negative impacts of the system in our heads, in our subconscious. Here is a list of the oppressive isms. While not exhaustive, the slide shows how each of these forms of oppression can be experienced at all three levels. I think internalized oppression, even with a community of support, is a personal journey that must be dealt with to effectively deal with the interpersonal and institutional levels of oppression. But as a political party, we generally address institutional solutions to injustice and suffering. The focus here today is on the institutions that create money. However, the internalized doubts and fears we feel must also be addressed if we are to effectively address the institutional and interpersonal levels of oppression. To break free and establish a fair and just sane money creation system, we will need stronger personal practices of protecting and encouraging one another, spotting and breaking the oppressor's chains, trusting each other instead of the machine. This is work for privileged people. Interpersonal oppression is the individual level of experiencing oppression, as we said, and at the visible interpersonal level of oppression, we often think of police brutality. And I had a photo illustrating that, but I removed it because just seeing such injustice is painful for us all. But consider the effect of debt as interpersonal economic oppression. The stress of being in debt often ties people to a job they do not like just to pay their debts. Student debt, too, is a system to keep people working to pay interest-bearing debt to the bankers. It is the same raw deal for something that should be part of our publicly funded social infrastructure. It is a system of wage slavery. It may become difficult for a family to access food, shelter, healthcare, and education without slipping deeper into debt. It reminds me of a song I heard when I was a kid on primetime television, watching Tennessee Ernie Ford singing 16 tons and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. I put sexism with imperialism here because both emerged with Western civilization. As the earth-based matrifocal egalitarian societies were invaded and destroyed, they were replaced with patriarchy. As these societies were conquered, the great Mother Earth goddess of love and abundance was pushed out of the temple and replaced with a male warrior god who demanded fealty. In ancient cultures, women who were at the center of managing the economy shared power with the men. Patriarchy did not share power, and sexism emerged as an economic oppression of women. Under patriarchy, women became the property of men. This guy, Zarura, I think, or Zurara, is credited with writing the first racist text. It was a history of the racist policies of Portugal's Prince Henry in the 1440s. Racism served to justify economic oppression of enslaving Africans. Formerly, Slavic people were taken as slaves, which is where the word slave comes from. But the Slavs began to build defenses against the slavers, so the more easily conquered Africans were targeted by the slave trade. The oppression of racism and sexism are deeply embedded in our culture. Institutional oppression. So we'll move to the hidden realm of oppression, the first level of it. The tools of institutional oppression comprise a social management system. The social management system is important to control public behavior and limit the dialogue to the acceptable narrative. Schools are to teach only what one needs to know to serve whatever level was planned for them in society. They teach obedience and conformity to create a compliant workforce. Let's take a look at how the monetary system that creates all our money works. All our money is created electronically by commercial banks when they make a loan, or by securities. We may all know that. The government only prints and mints the currency. However, the bills and coins for the banks to use when their customers want to withdraw some of this electronically created money from their account in cash. When a bank makes a loan, you owe the bank the principal plus interest. However, only the money for the principal of the loan is created, not the money for paying the interest. The money required for paying the interest is not created. Thus, the money to pay interest must come from the principal borrowed by someone else or a new loan. Thus, more loans must be made or people will default. This drives a predatory competition, a race to pay the interest and the interest on the interest. So, yeah, the government borrows money every year to fund the deficit. Always a big debate. This debt is accompanied by yearly interest payments, now 35% of the budget and rising, the second largest item in the discretionary budget. How often do you hear that mentioned in the media? This is generally paid by borrowing more each year, increasing the debt and the interest payments. Who owns that debt? Institutional investors and banks, and many foreign banks and investors. Since all money is created and issued as interest-bearing debt, where does all the interest money go? Here's a graph, or in this system, it goes mostly to the wealthy. While most people pay vastly more interest than they receive, as this chart shows, most of the interest goes to the top 10% of society. And if we break it down further, you'll see that it goes to the top 0.001% for the most part. Also, because all money is borrowed into existence, interest is being paid at every level of production, from the raw materials of farms and mines through processing, the manufacturing and distribution, so that an estimated 45% of everything we buy is interest. I thought that was an interesting figure. It came from Margaret Kennedy's research in Germany, and she did it for the UK. It's pretty much the same in all countries around the world. Here's a graph showing the entire money supply on the left and the entire debt on the right. The entire debt being public and private. So all the household debt, the corporate debt, everybody, the whole debt for the US. And as you can see, there's way more debt than money to pay it, which means this debt is unpayable, especially since much of the money supply is hoarded by the wealthy. So the wealthy are in the green and the rest of us are in the red. While this graph is only showing US figures, the picture is much the same for the entire world. The industrial assault on our planet, destroying land, sea, and air, is accompanied by a global debt soon to reach $300 trillion. That is oppression of the entire planet. The cost could well be civilization in a planet unable to support human life. I hope you've all seen the research from Stockholm Resilience showing 9 planetary boundaries within which is safe operating space for life on the planet. They show that 4 of the 9 have been crossed because of human activity: climate change, loss of biosphere integrity, land system change, altered biogeochemical cycles of phosphorus and nitrogen. David Attenborough has a new movie out about these boundaries and points out when we crossed the ozone layer boundary, world leaders got together and agreed to new rules and brought us back into safe territory quick. This needs to happen again soon regarding the other boundaries.
We must urge or replace world leaders to alter our systems and get us back into safe territory. So it's a political issue with our world leaders, right? It's government. And whose government, right? It's supposed to be we the people's government. The Princeton study showed that statistically, the public has zero influence on public policy. Note that the largest contributor is the financial sector. As Senator Durman said, the banks run this place. The big banks, through interlocking directorates, control all the major corporations and dominate every industry. Note that over a 10-year period, the 200 most politically active corporations spent $5.8 billion influencing government and got back $4 trillion in subsidies and support. The capitalists who owned the banks discovered long ago that controlling governments was their most profitable enterprise. And here we see a 670% return on investment. It's hard to imagine getting that from any other investment. We often talk about monopolies dominating and controlling markets and government, but as we see, not all monopolies are equal because they are all dominated by the money, the financial system. The funders of oppression are all the major corporations in every sector. Even sports teams and universities donate to oppression, to foundations that fund things like this. Let's see, next, funding the police, right? There's police foundations and all of these big corporations send money to these police foundations. And the militarization of the police, for instance, is funded by foundations to which all the major corporations contribute. Police departments already have massive budgets, averaging 20 to 45% of a municipal budget, while police foundations provide millions of dollars to purchase surveillance equipment and weapons with little public input or oversight. They also provide a public-private structure wherein the corporate elite can overtly support police departments through direct donations, sponsorship, special programs, and by serving as directors on foundation boards. The network of financial institutions are among the largest contributors to police, and they also own controlling interest in all the major corporations. Take just the food industry, for example. There are hundreds of food companies, but they are all owned and controlled by just 11 food corporations. Okay, you might ask, well, who owns them? Well, it turns out BlackRock owns controlling interest in all 11 of those corporations. BlackRock and Vanguard have ownership in some 1,600 American firms, which in 2015 had combined revenues of $9.1 trillion. When you add in the third largest global owner, State Street, their combined ownership encompasses nearly 90% of all S&P 500 firms. Okay, so who owns controlling interest in BlackRock? Well, it turns out the second of the two largest asset management firms in the world, Vanguard, does. And who owns controlling interest in Vanguard? Well, the structure of Vanguard is a bit unique in that it makes it very difficult to determine that. But we do know that all the major old money families, familiar names, are all heavily invested there. So what else is new, eh? This 1911 illustration shows the people on the bottom, we who make all the goods and services, supporting the wealthy, over them, carrying them, all right, the 1%, and over them, the military protecting and extending their wealth. And on top of them, we have the clergy and the church, now largely replaced by schools and media. And the political minions are on top of them, of the oligarchs who control the money, is on top of them. which is at the top of the oppression pyramid, the money creating authorities and world wealth. So we can see highly profitable this debt money system is, and it's over 400 years old, amassing enormous wealth. We can see how it centralizes control of the ecologically destructive food system. Debt has driven 5 million small farmers out of business since 1950. This destroyed the thriving local rural economies that once dotted the landscape. This destruction of local economies, which still goes on today, drives people to the cities, centralizing the population for central control. Huge slums surround many of the developing world cities as people compete for jobs that now, due to online retailers, are also disappearing as shops close. What is going on right now in the world? Okay, we're gonna move to the deep level of internalized oppression. And here, whoops. Is that right? Okay. Here we talk about the psychological consequences of capitalism. Harriet Fraud, you may know her, she's married to a famous economist, said that human connection is the most important thing in the world. Capitalism has isolated people in a very scary way. And I recommend you go listen to some of her talks on YouTube. They're pretty good. They're very good. This is what an economist said in regards to that. He said, economics without input from psychology is similar to doing mechanics while ignoring the laws of physics. And we find that to be true. The monetary system we have is based on usury. We've known for a long time that usury had psychological effects. It is the abuse of monetary authority for personal gain. A lot of people say, oh, it's just pay too much interest, and that certainly can be abuse of monetary authority. But to create money as debt for profit, that's also an abuse of monetary authority, I'd say. And Dante said of it, he said, he described it as an extraordinarily efficient form of violence by which you do the most damage with the least effort. There's research, there's a growing body of research, and you can search psychological consequences of money and you'll find a bunch of it. And of course, the money that they're studying, of course, is the money that we use, which is usury money, money issued under usury. And what they found was, that the mere presence of money changes people, and that money can be a barrier to social intimacy, and that the mere exposure to money can trigger unethical intentions and behavior. And I'm just going to share one of the research projects that they did that kind of illustrates this dynamic. They had 2 classrooms and 2 classes of college students, and one in each one, and they gave them a quiz with a bunch of ambiguous questions, And in one of the rooms, there was a big picture of a dollar bill on the wall, and in the other room was a picture of a seashell. Now, of course, the money here is a Federal Reserve note, and that represents the debt money system. And the seashell on the right is actually used for money too, even in some places of Africa today. But it is a cowrie shell that was used for centuries as money. But so when they divided these 2 classrooms up and they started taking the test, and the people, the scientists then looked through the window to gauge what behavior was going on. And what they found was that in the room where the people with the dollar bill, they said they preferred working alone to collaboration. They sat farther apart from one another. They hesitated to ask each other for help. When they did ask for help, they responded to requests as if they were insensitive to others. In other words, they weren't feeling good, and they were feeling kind of wanting to stay amongst in themselves, you know. But when they looked in the window of the other room, they found that everyone was sitting close together in a group, didn't hesitate to ask each other for help. They were sensitive to how others felt, and they laughed and joked and collaborated. I think this is an important distinction to realize that the money on the left is privately issued for profit. The money on the right was publicly issued for care, for the just a pure exchange medium. So ending the oppression of the debt money system. Let's get into that. We've talked about oppression enough. Let's see how to fix it. And the first thing I want to talk about is leverage points, because the economic system is a system. And a leverage point is a point within a complex system, such as a corporation or a living body, a city, an ecosystem, or an economy, where one small change in one thing can change the entire system. And systems analysts will often say that, yeah, they come into a corporation, for instance, and they've got a problem with one of their systems. And we go to look at the system when we discovered that there's lots of attention on that point, but they're all pushing the wrong direction. In an economic system, money is the leverage point, because economic system is the exchange of goods and services, and we use money to do that. So it's a leverage point, important part of that. And so the greening of the dollar offers 3 essential reforms to fix that. And this comes, all the legislation was submitted to Congress also doing these same 3 things by Dennis Kucinich back in 2011. It was called the NEED Act. It's now been updated and is the Monetary Reform Act of 2020.
I hear it on this one, so.
The first reform, the Fed becomes part of our government. The second, bank creation of money is stopped. And third, elected government creates and spends US money into the economy. And of course, they would be spending it into the productive economy, not speculation, which is where a lot of the money is going from the commercial banks. And all 3 reforms should be done at once too, or power will remain with the banks, because the Bank of England was nationalized in 1946, but they still don't control their money. The commercial banks still control the 97% of issuing the money. Oh, could someone talking during this, please mute. Jackson and Van Buren revoked the second bank of the US because they, but because he didn't, you know, he stopped the banks issuing money, but because he didn't issue any money, that caused a depression immediately. And debt-free greenbacks were created under Lincoln, but because he didn't stop the banks from creating money,
Maybe
they eventually got the advantage on it. And so also, I want to point out that government does better than the banks when it comes to monetary policy. History shows us all the way through the course that economies have always been more stable under government control of the money than they have under banks. Now, you could bring up examples like Weimar Republic or Argentina and some of these things, and they're always blamed on the government. And that is bank strategy, to blame it always on the government, because they control their central banks mostly around the world. So the idea is to always blame the government for what the banks have done. And of course, the banks in Weimar Republic of Germany intentionally destroyed that economy to install Hitler. Money has two roles, and we generally only know about the first one. It's an exchange medium. It's just money. It's neutral, right? It's just, we pass it around, we buy stuff. It's just, nothing to it. But it's also an instrument of power, the hidden hand, so to speak, in the markets. They talk about the hidden hand is money, because if you hoard a lot of money, you can dominate a market. You can buy an industry. You can control a government. So the trick is going to be, how can money's characteristics as a usurious instrument of power be overcome without eliminating its positive qualities as a neutral medium of exchange? Because if we issue public money, for instance, well, there's already a whole bunch of wealth out there. So how do we deal with that? Well, we got that problem solved, because Silvio Gesell in 1919 wrote The Natural Economic Order, in which he pointed out that we must make money worse as a commodity if we wish to make it better as a medium of exchange. and he explained how to do that. And where'd my laptop go? And anyway, he was brilliant, because even Keynes and Fisher, they all admired this guy when they found out about him, but they didn't admire him because of his book. They read his book after after he died, and after his ideas were put into and were implemented, and saw how they worked. That got their attention. That got the attention of the world, in fact, because the miracle of Wörgl just spread like wildfire around the world. It was 1931, the Depression, and this town, the mayor had read Silvio Gesell's book, and so he talked to the city council, and they decided they would issue a currency with a demurrage fee on it. Now, a demurrage fee is kind of like a parking fee. It's a slowly declining value of the money. And this increases circulation, and it also prevents hoarding. So think about those massive hoards of money kept in private offshore accounts. And suddenly we changed the money to US money. And that includes all of that money. And we put a negative fee on it so that it starts shrinking in their bank accounts unless they spend it and get it invested. And they'll take riskier investments too, because they're losing value in their money. And this is a good thing for the people, because the people in Wörgl enjoyed $2.5 million worth of public projects being completed in 15 months. I mean, it employed everyone, and it made them prosperous during that time. And they even started thinking about the future. They built a ski jump. They started replanting their forests around. They built a big water reservoir and a bridge, besides extending all their water system and paved streets and streetlights out throughout the town. And of course, that got the attention of towns all around the world, and everybody wanted to do it. And the towns around Wörgl did start doing it, but soon the German government shut them down because, couldn't have that. The bankers didn't like it. So, but in 1933, thousands of cities and towns all around the world wanted to duplicate the miracle of Wörgl, and they started issuing stamp script too. And a lot of them didn't know how to do it exactly. So Irving Fisher wrote a book called Stamp Script to get out to the people, to show them how to do it. And he told FDR, he said, let's make this a policy so that, as an emergency measure to get the economy going again, because it could get it going in just a few weeks. FDR said no, of course, because he was from a banking family. It's not a new idea, really. to have a currency of declining value. And because the ancient Egyptians had one. When the farmers would bring their grain to the public granaries, they were given a receipt that had the date and the amount that they were storing. And so if they had, say, 10 sacks of grain that they brought in in spring, when they go to get it back, they could only get 9 sacks of grain with that money. So it was a slowly declining value. And this created prosperity amongst the people because they passed around as money from one another. And so this created a legendary prosperity in ancient Egypt for 3,000 years. And they also started thinking about the future. That's kind of what the pyramids were about. And they worshiped Isis. They had a woman deity. And this reemerged in the High Middle Ages, where the lords, not really realizing it, issued a currency of declining value for 250 years. And this created enormous prosperity in Central Europe. And the people ate so well, they grew tall. The average height of people in the High Middle Ages, in the late High Middle Ages, were taller than the average European is today. And they did, and that's also what they call the real Renaissance, because that's when the universities first began. Women enjoyed much more freedom and position. The Sacred Mother was worshipped in the form of the Black Madonna, which was all over Europe at the time. Statues, I believe, probably taken from Egypt, but they worshipped a female deity. And all of these, they built 1,000 cathedrals during that time. And those cathedrals were all funded by the people themselves. They weren't funded by the state or the church. The people built these, and they built them for economic reasons because they wanted to attract pilgrims to their town. And they were thinking of the future, which is why they built the things 3 times larger than the village that built them. I mean, so they could seat 3 times as many people, right? So if it's a village of 50 people, they had a cathedral that could seat 150. And it worked too, because those towns are still tourist attractions and people come there and spend their money still. So it worked very well, but that only lasted for 250 years. And because of war debt, because at the same time, those guys were getting into the Crusades and stuff like that, and all this war debt was amassing, and they had to turn over their monetary system to the bankers, to the money lenders, they called them at the time, you know, the people that really had the wealth that they would borrow gold from to pursue war, and then they were in debt. And because war is not very profitable usually, to the people fighting it anyway. And so that a little piece of history there, that it's not a new thing, and it's been proven to work very well. And it works because of the dynamics of net present value. And this affects human psychology, and it's expressed in a mathematical equation. And it's kind of interesting that works like that. And to demonstrate this, just let me show you this little set of slides here. That this is our baseline. So in 10 years, pine trees are worth 100, and 100 years, an oak tree is worth 1,000. That's the base. And if you do your system with a currency at 5% interest, positive interest, then in 10 years, those pine trees are only worth $61, and 100 years are only worth $760 in that equation. But if you have a currency of minus 5%, in 10 years, the pine trees are worth $167, and the oak tree is like worth, golly, over $150,000. So this all operates subconscious. And that's why people were thinking of the future. They didn't know anything about a mathematical equation, nothing at all. It was all the psychological effect of the money system. Because since the dawn of times, monetary systems have been shaping the flows of human activity in every realm of endeavor: food production, education, health, business, etc., by determining how we value, apply, and exchange our creativity and the fruits of our labor. It is for this reason the most influential of all human-made systems. So how do we get this thing happening? Well, there's a couple of different ideas. One is we've got this monetary reform. We've got our legislation in our platform to go after monetary reform, but there's very little political action on that lever right now because everybody's engaged in issues that are kind of caused by this money system. You know, all of the issues with immigration, all of the issues with war and peace, the issues with economic injustice, racism, all of those issues are affected by the monetary system negatively. And so something we could do, use some leverage, right? Know those issues are caused by the monetary system. And so we use them as the fulcrum. They're the reasons why we want monetary reform. And we get on the end of that monetary reform lever and we can move the world. That's our PMRC presentation. I think Sue probably put the link to subscribe to our newsletter in the chat. And would love to hear a discussion, folks, to see how we did. Do you kind of get an idea of the interrelatedness of money and oppression and an understanding of how the current system works and the fundamentals of a fair and just money system? If you have any questions, we'd love to answer those. Thank you. All right. So I guess were there, I think the chat was closed, so probably weren't able to put questions in the chat, but you should be able to now.
Chuck is on the stack.
Chuck?
Yep, I'm looking at the chat. And
Paul.
Chuck
All
Paul.
right. All right, Chuck.
Hey, thanks. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate it. I think it was
Thank
very informative, and it demystifies something very almost mystical, I guess. But one of the things that fascinates me is that, and I saw a Frontline report just the other day, and they talked about the 2009 market collapse, and then the practice of printing money. What's the term when they print money? There's a two-word
easing.
Quantitative easing.
Yeah.
And they did that. And so between the 2019, the 2009, and then most recently with COVID, they've printed well into the multi-trillions of dollars. And what the Frontline explained, that money has largely gone to the finance sector. So the 1.01% have increased just hugely. But there seems on one level, I'm interested in whatever happened to Dennis Kucinich, if he's still alive and around. But it's aside from that, don't Greens effectively, or anybody on the left, anybody who wants the reform that you're talking about, kind of have a moral claim to the monetary system, given that multi-trillions of dollars have been essentially paid into and sustained and held up and propped, and that to such an extent that for the original 0.01% to say, we earned this all on our own and it's our money, is kind of dispelled. under the huge trillions of dollars that have been put out. And this is all going to be paid interest by the public. So effectively, it seems to me that the public has a claim to that multi-trillions that are being held by the 0.01%. So I just wanted to share that as food for thought, and I'd like to hear what.
Exactly. And of course, it's our government's responsibility to do that. And we need to make government be responsible. And of course, I guess that's what our political party is all about, really, is making them responsible. But we also have to remember that when we're seeing things on television like PBS, as Noam Chomsky said years ago in his book, Manufacturing Consent, pointed out that the public radio system has been dominated by the corporations. And so it becomes a propaganda station for the intelligentsia. And what he's talking about is they're going to give you very complex but good sounding, right sounding stuff. But what they never mentioned well, there's quite a few things they didn't mention. Eugene Wolitson listed them on Facebook earlier today. But they, one thing is they didn't mention was that the Fed is not a government agency. So they keep talking about it as if it's the government, but it's not the government. It's owned by JP Morgan, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, a whole bunch of others. Sue Peters dug all that stuff out. JP Morgan, I think, owns 53%, JP Morgan Chase, 53% of the New York Fed. Now that's the main Fed. And there's other Feds, but they're also dominated by big banks and owned by big private banks. And all the employees in the Fed system, they're all private employees of this corporation called the Fed. Now, there's these public appointees like the Board of Governors and stuff like that, but they tend to come right out of people who support what's going on because they're all getting rich.
Thank you for that question, Chuck. And for the answer, Howard. I will add that even though I understand and agree 100% about our media system being very controlled and propagandistic, but still, I found value in that Frontline report that you referred to, Chuck,
Yes.
because it's such a highly respected program and brings the whole idea of the Fed being too powerful. And they talk specifically about moral hazard, which is training the rich people to demand. Well, anyway, so I just want to say it's not 100% terrible, and I'm grateful for it.
Chomsky said, Mary,
Go ahead.
in his, if you've read that book, he pointed out that good propaganda only works if there's a lot of truth in it.
Fine. I absolutely agree. I wanted to go back to, thank you. I wanted to go back to Chuck's other question about Dennis. Since more voices is always better, I don't know if someone else on the committee here wants to speak to what happened to Dennis after he introduced that fabulous legislation, or should we turn to Howard? Go ahead.
Anybody else know? Well, he written a book about his experience in Cleveland, right? The big battle that he had with the corporations there over, what was it, the water system or public transit?
Electrical, yeah. Public utility.
Electrical, public utilities. And so he's plugging his book right now because it's been published, I think. And that's kind of what he's doing. He's staying backed away from pursuing monetary reform, feeling like he's too alone in that.
Well, to me,
It's a little dangerous if you're a high profile person.
what happened specifically after in the same year that he introduced the NEED Act, when his election cycle came up again, his district got gerrymandered and divided him out.
Right.
To specifically answer Chuck's question. I don't know if someone would like elsewhere to speak to Chuck's questions, or should we go to Tina, who is also on the staff? Anybody to say something more about Chuck's questions, or is it time to go to Tina? Go ahead, Tina.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for
Hi.
the presentation. Yes, with student debt forgiveness, which I'm very interested in, a lot of people, and predatory loan forgiveness, a lot of people balk at this, I hear on social media and speaking to people, because they don't understand that throughout time, there have been debt jubilees that have saved economies, and also the power of the velocity of money, that when people have more money to spend, you have a better economy. And I'm wondering how, I know that there's a student loan justice group that we've had as a guest speaker at our local that says that President Biden can forgive student loan debt with federal student loan debt with an executive order right now, and that we need bankruptcy protection return to student loan debt, which is the only debt supposed to be guaranteed under the Constitution. But how would the Green Party, address student loan debt and the predatory debt so that we can free these people from this unsustainable economic debt? Thanks.
Good
Well,
question. Go ahead, Howard.
The student debt could be forgiven, possibly, but what it would take is money. And so they would have to borrow the money to forgive the debt, because the banks aren't going to forgive any debts. And unless the government said, oh, well, we're taking your money powers away and we're going to issue the money. Now, the reason why it's good for our government to get in charge of the money is because that puts them in charge of public policy. And so if something like that's unfair for the people and the people want, they could fix it. But right now they have to go to the banks and ask them, and they don't want to do nothing. So because they're just out to make money, they'd just assume you all was in slums and paying them $500 a month for it.
Could I respond, Howard?
Please do, please.
Okay, Student Loan Justice is the name of the group, and they said that already that the public has basically paid these loans off long ago. They mainly are collecting credit, and that the Biden has the ability to not collect on these loans just by executive order. He would not have to collect on them anymore. And also the education secretary also has a not very well-known law in there that they can just stop collecting on student loan debt, which they've been doing during the pandemic. But to write it off actually doesn't increase the national debt one penny, and that it could be done by executive order today by Biden.
Right.
Thanks.
So it's a political issue, and trying to get the president to do something for the people, that's something of a challenge. On the other hand, if we had a government that had the power, it wouldn't have to be badgering our president trying to get him to do something good, because Congress would be doing it. That's where it should be happening. But I'm fine with forgiving debt. But the thing is, that doesn't fix the system. That still leaves the bankers in power. That still leaves them issuing money as debt. In fact, the early jubilees that they had, that's exactly what, because the economy just stopped dead. Everybody was in so much debt, and all the farmers had lost their land to the usurers in Mesopotamia. And so they had to forgive the debt to get the economy going again, and of course, that's kind of what would happen today too. They'd forget some of the debt, they wouldn't forgive it all, give some of that debt, but they're still in control of the economy, and they're still taking us to the cleaners.
Tina, thanks for that question. And thanks for posting the organization that you're mentioning with some more details about the specific student loan situation.
There are some other debt protest groups out there as well. It'd be nice for them all to get together and push. Yeah.
Right. Now, Eugene is on the stack, and Chuck Fall is making a couple I think we'll go back to Chuck to have him pose the questions to the group after Eugene has his turn, because those are some more good questions. And Maureen will be after Chuck. Eugene, Chuck, Maureen, please.
I'd like to thank Tina for bringing up the velocity of money,
which is a very important concept of how money circulates, and the fact that money velocity has fallen since 2008 in a very big fashion. We covered that in an article in our newsletter a while back. And, there are tables from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City that shows, exactly how velocity has fallen. And Howard's description earlier about Wörgl, W-O-R-G-L, and what was done in 1931 to 33, that is where they created a local script and it increased the circulation of money. That's why only like $30,000 of money created by the city in this new script circulated very rapidly in the town. And
It was only 6,000.
okay, 6,000, and resulting in how much, Howard? In terms
2.5
of
million, 2.5.
right, right. So velocity is a very important item here. And when you look at the table, how velocity has fallen, the system is bankrupt. The system, people are hoarding this money. They're taking it out of circulation. And the people that most need the money, the poorest and, hardworking people, they don't have enough money. And so that the circulation breaks down because the interest is being sucked out of the economy constantly. I praise the Frontline special, even though it was only 43 minutes and it took something like 3 to 5 years to create. The problem was that I hope it would be part 2 and part 3, but it's part of Saving the Dream is the funder of these series of shows. And it's the Pete Peterson Foundation is one of the monies contributing. And I wonder after this one come out, they may put their kibosh on anything else. But I'm writing to the producers, urging them, all this research they've done, please try to give us a solution or give us a range of solutions that people could think about, talk about, discuss, and possibly put pressure on their legislatures to carry out. Because the US Constitution says that money is the sole responsibility of the Congress, and to coin money and determine its value. And that is completely disregarded by the 1913 Federal Reserve Act. That was, Wall Street tried for 5 years to get this passed after there was a crash in 1907. So 13 years later, they were able to push it through. And the history of that is very helpful to learn, because the lost science of money goes into that. It's also on our website, and you can look, you'll hear about it in our newsletter, etc. And the way Woodrow Wilson was the president at the time, he's a Democrat, okay? He comes in his first year, and he gets snookered, as all the Democrats were. The Republicans also supported it, but the Democrats finessed it in, because that's frequently what happens, that the Republicans can't do some of the worst things they want to do, and they will talk the Democrats into doing it. Wilson later said that was the worst decision of his life, or of his political life. However, getting us involved in World War I is a close second to creating the Fed. But when they created the Fed, they also created, they implemented the federal income tax. And at the same time they did that, they made legal foundations and enabled the very rich corporations, Ford, Rockefeller, etc., to hide their money in the foundations, and it would not be taxed. And these were 3 vehicles to hogtie the American people. Number one, disregard the US Constitution, to subcontract the creation, the the involvement with money to the Fed, which was, privately owned by banks. They hide that, they obscure that. But I think the show at Frontline was a good opening wedge. And even though I criticize it for its limitations and not showing possible solutions, it and two other books were very helpful in bringing this subject to the forefront. And one is called Fed Up, 2016. And the woman who wrote it was a banker on Wall Street. She got married, went to Dallas, and then she began to write a column for the Dallas Morning News. And the guy Fisher that was interviewed, who was a former head of the Dallas Fed, and tried to oppose quantitative easing, etc. She was an advisor to Fisher, and her bank background helped Fisher to articulate his positions at the national Fed level. And so that is a good book to look at. She worked there 9 years, and she tells you about the mess inside the Fed. It has 1,000 economists that do nothing but play with their theoretical games. They have no practical experience. It was her coming from Wall Street that did have practical experience. The other book I'll tell you to think about is called The Engine of Inequality. And that woman was interviewed, an elderly woman about 55, 60 years old, named Karen Petru, who was an advisor to banks, that wrote this thing saying that the Fed creates bubbles and it creates inequality. And she's so angered by that. She's legally blind, but obviously she is able to do research. And this exposes the Fed. So you have these pinpoints of real revelations about what the Fed is. And it's necessary for us in the political movement to try to expand that and talk about solutions like the NEED Act. Thank you.
Thanks, Eugene. Does anyone want to respond to Eugene before we go back to Chuck's question about Dennis?
Hey, let me just respond. I think you guys are doing fantastic work, and I think this work is really, really important for Greens to be out front on and providing the solutions. And it sounds like the solution is, well, it requires federal legislation to take power back from the bankers and put it into the actual Congress. I get that. One of my questions is, out here in Oregon, we have the bank state theory, and that if each state had its own bank, that would be another way to pull money from and not be wrapped up in the oligarchic web of their monetary program. And then my other kind of just, so I think somehow a succinct statement of solution is going to be powerful to have for the candidates who are out there trying to, get ballot access and so on. But my other question is, I'm really interested in the 2024 presidential run and think we should be running it now, because we're in a state of ecological, but also we're in a state of monetary financial emergency. And someone like Ben Sinich intrigues me, because I know he got burned for his 9/11 position, and which is to say that he doubted the official narrative, and then he got fried for that. So he's been burned by his own people, as it were, in the Democratic Party. And obviously he's run up against the wall of limits to what a Dem could do. Would he abandon his Democratic affiliation and join the Greens? I think he'd be someone for us to consider. If anybody has an in with him, I would encourage approaching him.
The last time I asked him, he sort of laughed and shook his head.
Okay. Maybe he would still consider. I don't know.
Right now,
maybe
right now he's running for mayor of Cleveland again.
Oh,
Which is where which is where as an 18-year-old, he got his start and people came to know what a sincere and smart guy he is.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for you. Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Rita, and then we also want to respond to your question about public banking and state banks. Go ahead. Rita.
I just wanted to thank Chuck for bringing that up. You know, he was involved in a conversation with me on the national affairs list, and I was getting beaten up for stating that we were going to have an economic crash.
Haven't they noticed they happen every 10 or 12 years?
So thank you, Chuck, for that. Now, let's see, there's several committee members here. Would we like to have a fresh voice respond to the question about public banking? Otherwise, Howard, you're our go-to.
Well, public banking is a fine idea. In fact, I think we should have lots of public banks when we have a public money system. It's kind of like Herman Daly, who is one of the proponents of ecological economics that began with Frederick Soddy. And if you go back further, I guess the physiocrats, but he, what was the question? Oh, public banks, yes. So the idea of getting a public bank would be a good idea too, and they could help out a little bit in this kind of an economy. But capitalizing a bank is a challenge for any city who's deep in debt already, right? It takes capital to start a bank. Now, Ellen, she's a genius. Maybe she's figured out how they can do it. In the meantime, we need to make some bigger changes, because that's really a strategy to survive within the current system, as are a lot of local currencies, these network currencies that are out there. They, they help a little bit in the local level, but they really are just a strategy to survive in the same system. And we need to change the system.
Right. I agree with that 100%, needing to change the system. I actually work with a group who's very passionate about public banking, and I keep promoting public money, the Green Party solution, with them. And the biggest fault that they want to have some control of some of their local money. That's great. What they somehow don't seem to realize is that public banks cannot stop this huge torrent of private money that goes into speculating and throwing all the economies everywhere out of whack all the time. They can't stop the 100 times more money that the big banks will keep creating just by creating some good money in a public way, responsible to the public. Now, I wanted to go back to Maureen Doyle. She made 2 specific points. And I would like to hear her voice and have her go ahead and say them.
Hi, Maureen.
Oh,
There you go.
hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I just, I just find it laughable when anybody says that Biden is going to forgive debt. But more power to you if you want to try it. Biden is a credit card guy.
Right.
I mean, he's embedded in the capitalist banking system. Debt is his thing. How is he going to forgive that?
Good point.
I just don't see that it's going to happen.
Very good point.
But thanks. And I agreed with Chuck about asking Dennis Kucinich. And it doesn't hurt to ask him again.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he has a different perspective now.
Things
Very
keep
good.
changing.
And the Democrats have screwed him totally.
Major.
So,
Eugene Stack.
okay, thanks.
Okay, now we've got a warning.
Okay.
We have 1 minute left.
Yeah, we gotta wrap it up, you guys.
Thanks, Selena, for that notification. Eugene,
you
is
all.
it something really quick, or should we let Howard wrap up?
It's very quick. Howard, why don't you pass on
Bonnie,
to
stop.
Oh, Manny, I'm sorry. You were on the stack. I'm sorry, Manny. I didn't see that. Please go ahead.
Only got
Did I
a
do a misunderstanding?
Sam and Manny.
It's muted.
Yeah. Are you trying to talk to us, Manny? Can you unmute?
There you
Thank
go.
Hello,
you.
can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Okay, great. Okay, first of all, I want to say thank you for the great presentation that we had today. One thing I do have to say is, and Howard, I agree a lot with you, but we're gonna talk straight up, okay? Because I'm a green person. I've been with the Green Party since 2000. What's wrong with the economy is capitalism. What's wrong with this country, and they showed this on 2001, is they know what we've done. They know how we have vilified the races, the classes, how we genocide the indigenous people. They've seen this in the Middle East. They know. That's one of the reasons why they tried to do what they did on 9/11, even though a lot of that is left to discuss. So this is what I think it has happened. We have left Wall Street dominate for a long, long time. And I don't know why. And this is the thing that really gets to me, when even with the Sack family, oh, we didn't do anything because we didn't want to hurt our shareholders. Them, the shareholders, they are the ones that are destroying our planet. They're destroying the economy. So there's a way that we need to stop Wall Street from growing. There's a way that we need to get into the shareholders and find out what are the companies that they own, and BDS, boycott, divest, sanction. We're going to get this country back. This is the only way we can do it. Unfortunately, we can do it on revolution, but we can do economic revolution. That's
Yes.
all I have to say.
Thank you, Manny. That's right.
Thank you
And
very
I-
much. Rita?
Just wanted to say the major shareholders in the largest corporations are the financial institutions.
Right. That's how they got us. So we need to figure that one out. And I think we can rattle their cage if we get it together and unite. So thank you very much. I think we're at the end of our time. And but I just love having conversations like this with you folks. So
Subscribe to our newsletter. Think about scheduling a session for your particular interest to talk about how it relates to the money problem. And many thanks for attending.
You're all welcome to come to one of our meetings on Thursday.
Everyone can see.
Oh, the song.
Life continue. There's no guarantee. Understand the problem affecting me and you. We all need to focus on what we need to do, because the bankers create credit, all our money as debt. And that is what is causing the inequity we get, concentrating all the wealth and power to a few. Don't you think it's high time we tried something new? So let's change the money. No better way to turn the world around now. Change the money. What's gone up must come down. So change the money. It'll make our future bright. It's all about the money now. Time to do it right. No more bursting bubbles, no bailing out the banks. Money for production, tell speculators no thanks. We could lower taxes, put money in everyone's pocket, and that would make the economy take off like a rocket. And we could have an economy in a steady state. No more worries over the unemployment rate. No more corporate money choosing who we can elect, and no more corporate lobbies with the Congress we respect. When we change the money, no better way to turn the world around now. Change the money. What's gone up now must come down. So change the
Change
money.
the money.
It'll make our future bright. It's all about the money now. Time to do it right.
Yes,
Thank you.
bravo. Boss, change the money.
Yep, change the money.
Thank you for hosting us, Felina.
Thank you, Felina, for hosting us. We
No problem.
appreciate the
And thanks to
time.
Sue.
And thanks to Howard and Mary.
Thanks
Howard,
to,
that
Thank
was
you,
great.
everyone, for hosting this great
thanks
workshop.
to everyone who asked questions and contributed to the conversation. It was very interesting for me and I appreciate it.
Very helpful.
Thank you, Chuck. Bye-bye.